Hi guys, if you're new to my channel, thanks for watching. Please would you check out the previous talks just to get some context about what we're doing. My name is Johan Kakidis and we're busy discussing how to transform society. Now today I want to look at the big issue of drugs. I just came back yesterday from another trip to another town that in the last year I have watched become destroyed because of drugs. And I mean, it's impossible to discuss this massive issue in under 10 minutes, but let me just throw out a few points there. The first point I want to make is that in 2004, when I started working with addicts, I spent a lot of time in a prison close by. It was a maximum prison, and every week on a Thursday morning, I would get roughly between 50 and 100 new prisoners who just entered the system. And we would discuss why they landed up in prison. And, you know, without fail, 9 out of 10 times they admitted to me that they were in prison either directly or indirectly because of drugs. Either it was they committed a crime um, because they were under the influence of drugs, or they committed a crime in order to get drugs. The point is, drugs played a massive part in them getting into prison. And this was especially so for the crystal meth amphetamine addicts. I mean, this was a maximum prison. Most of the crimes were rape or murder or serious theft or armed robbery. And they would often find themselves sitting there telling me they did stuff they never dreamed they would do. But because of the drugs, they landed up in the situation. Now, I am convinced that our prison system here, which is completely overcrowded, would probably be 90% empty if it wasn't for drugs. The second point I want to make is over the years, I've counseled uh, many victims of rape and sexual abuse. And one of the here in Cape Town, it's very common that the victims of sexual violence are known to the perpetrator. Now, one of the sad things for me is how many of them were sexually abused or raped whilst under the influence of drugs, or they allowed themselves to be abused in order to get their hands on drugs. Now, this is particularly a problem I'm finding with younger women aged between 15 and 25, and they often land up finding themselves in a cycle of abuse where, I mean, weekly, even daily, they will expose themselves to abuse just in order to get hold of drugs. This is becoming a big issue. The third issue I want to make is in my counseling with drug addicts, I have discovered that many of them started using drugs after a traumatic event. It often was rape, or it was abortion, or it was a violent crime, or even sickness. And then some misguided person told them that, well, you know, if you've got a lot of pain, you've got to numb the pain. The best way to numb pain is to use drugs or alcohol. And, you know, I can honestly say that the problem with numbing pain is that the pain does not go away. It simply gets worse. But anyway, they start off like this, and then within a matter of weeks or months, they suddenly find themselves addicted. I want to also add here, besides rape and abortion, abuse at home was also one of the more common issues that leads people onto drugs. The fourth issue I want to raise is that there seems to be some confusion as to whether marijuana, or dacha as we call it here, is in fact a drug or not. Now, where I live in the south here, we have got a very large group of people who fiercely defend marijuana. And their argument often is, well, you know, it never hurts anybody. And the other argument they use is, well, it's a wonderful, it's got medicinal value. Now, I've worked with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of marijuana addicts, and I failed to see anything positive. And, you know, scientific research, not my opinion, but scientific research has shown that marijuana has got, leads to 70% greater chance of getting cancer. It also causes brain abnormalities amongst children and teenagers that use it. It causes low sperm count. It causes psychosis. And you know, the list goes on and on and on and on and on. The problem I find, though, is particularly if I give public talks on drug use and drug abuse, is that the pro-marijuana group will stand up and verbally attack me. So it's impossible to reason with them. But you know, in my experience, I failed to see anything positive. It's incidentally, I want to add here, a couple of years ago when my government made it legal to grow it at home and use it for personal use, we saw at the local hospitals instantly a spike in the amount of drug-induced psychosis, particularly amongst the ages 12 to 16. And I must tell you, there is nothing pleasant about sending a 12-year-old child away to a psychiatric unit for 6 months. It's traumatizing on the child and on the family. The next point I want to make is that one of the main drugs that is used here in Cape Town and across my province is a drug called TIC, which is known as crystal methamphetamine in America. Now, TIC is a horrible drug, and I have noticed that drug dealers have got a strategy where they come into a new place, a new community, a new town where TIC does not exist, and they'll hand it out free of charge at the schools, at the fences, at break time, or after school. Now, TIC is one of those drugs, a bit like heroin, where it is almost immediately you can become addicted to it. And so they get these children addicted to the drug. And then a few months later, they will raise the price up to 30 Rand for a little bag. And many of the TIC addicts that I deal with need at least between 5 and 10 of those little bags a day. Now, the problem with TIC is that once you are addicted, you become a largely dysfunctional person. You are unable to keep down a job, for instance. And so many TIC addicts will resort to prostitution, or let's call it transactional sex, or crime, in order to raise the 200 Rand or the 150 Rand they need per day to use this drug. And often I find TIC addicts, they will do horrendous crimes. I won't discuss it on YouTube here, but I have come across some real atrocities. Again, the problem, as I said, is erratic, violent behavior. And, you know, in some of the smaller towns where I've gone and worked, the police and the social workers have said to me that they themselves could not believe what these TIC addicts were capable of doing and how it's destroyed the town just in a matter of months. Now, I can list several small towns across and communities across the Western Cape here where I have witnessed TIC destroy a place in 6 months to a year. Now, this is truly a drug straight out of hell. Now, the last point I want to make is what I'm starting to see more and more of is the use of TIC and Mandrax together. So drug addicts are using uppers and downers, and they become dependent on this. And this is becoming more prevalent, and the problem is it is causing enormous amounts of mental health issues, as well as physiological damage to the brain. So we are starting to see more and more bipolar disorder. We're starting to see more schizophrenia, more mood swings, more major depression because of this drugs. It's just not natural, messing around with your chemical imbalance in your brain. Now, we face several issues in this war against drugs. The first is that we do not have enough rehabs here where I stay. And often the government rehabs, you have to wait 6 months to a year, and that can be fatal, that amount of time. I also find that rehabs often do not work because what it does is it takes the person out of their circumstances, their environment. It puts them in a little bubble where it is quite easy to come off drugs. And after 6 months, they are clean, and then they get sent home. And often between hours and weeks, that person goes back on drugs. Because at home, the situation has in fact gotten worse. The second problem is that drugs have become normalized in our society, and this is particularly so with alcohol or marijuana. And, you know, I think many people understand that in order for an addict to come off drugs, they have to admit that they have a problem. But if no one's telling you that you have a problem, and if everyone's telling you it's perfectly fine and it's normal and it's legal, then you're not going to believe that you have a problem. So we are finding more and more addicts are simply not admitting to step number one, which is admitting they have a problem. Children or on drugs, and more specifically the parents of these children, are often in denial, or they do not know what to do. So I will often get brought a child after a very long time where the parent has tried very harsh punishment. So they will beat the child and they will lock the child up and they will call it names and humiliate it in the hope that they will somehow shock this child into coming off drugs. The problem is that it causes more emotional damage and the child feels more and more rejected, which just leads them further down the drug spiral. It's also a problem that we do not have nearly enough counselors on this earth to deal with the emotional issues that drug addicts carry. And I speak particularly for the drug addicts I deal with that come from the poorer side of society. They do not have 500 Rand per hour or whatever it is to go see a counselor. And they'll often need to see a counselor for a very long time. So that's just completely out of their reach. And the last point I want to make, which is the saddest, is that many churches they take a very dim view on drug addicts. So instead of welcoming them with wide open arms and accepting them and reaching out to them, they in fact turn them away or they reject them. And this again, rejection and drug addiction do not go hand in hand. It just leads the person down a further spiral. And often they will tell me that somehow they've been led to believe that in fact God has rejected them. Not so. So what needs to be done here? I think firstly, we have to admit as society that we have a problem with drugs. And this was particularly evident through the lockdown when the alcohol restrictions were lifted and our hospital trauma rooms filled up that very night. And the amounts of femicide and horrendous domestic violence, particularly against women, just spiked. We have got a problem with alcohol. We have a problem with drugs. Secondly, we have to have a plan in place to deal with this. We can't just carry on and pretend the problem will go away. It's not. And the best way to start with a plan is to inform ourselves. So I want to encourage churches. Just because you might not think it's your problem, but really I think churches need to start with this war on drugs by informing themselves. They need to get a really good understanding about drugs, what it does to families, what it does to the individual, what needs to be done to fix it. Without proper information, it is impossible to do something about it. Thirdly, and I think this is the most important, is that this plan will not work if there is not a large dose of grace and empathy towards the drug addict and towards their family as well. You know, drug addicts do not need to be judged. They need to be loved. They need to be accepted. They find themselves in a place which is hell, and it is our job to get them out of there. And the truth is, and I can speak from vast experience, is that many of them are going to relapse. Not once, not twice, but 3 or 4 times. And they are going to disappoint you over and over again. But we need to persevere. We cannot allow them to land themselves up either in the grave or in prison or in a mental institute. It is not right. Now, if you or your church wants to do something about this, and maybe you don't know where to start, please feel free to drop me a line. My email is in the description below. It is johan@soteriaministries.org.za. I'll be more than happy to assist in any way I can. Guys, the devil has done enough damage to our children. We need to start fighting back. Thank you for watching.